Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. And tonight I am very excited to welcome Spencer Fleury for a celebration of his story collection, I Blame Myself, but Also You. Let's give Spencer a hand. My friend in blue over here, this other author, is Elizabeth Stix, who will be joining Spencer in conversation. Let's give Elizabeth a hand as well. Excellent. Thank you all for joining us, both in person here, hello, welcome, and online, hello, online audience. I'm waving to the camera if you cannot see. We are broadcasting from San Francisco, California. We open each of our events with a land acknowledgement. We are operating on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we think at Green Apple that acknowledgement requires action, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. We would recommend to you the Ramaytush Ohlone Land Trust, which you can learn more about at the back desk. We have information there if you're curious about how to participate in this project of rematriation. I have very brief business before I let these two take over. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. How do you feel about picture taking, authors? Fine. Picture taking is just fine, but don't take the call in the middle of the event. That is not appropriate. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. I'll take this moment just to plug one event that we have coming up next Saturday. August 24th is this location's 10th anniversary. So it's very exciting. It's a big deal for a bookstore to be around for 10 years anywhere. So we are quite grateful to everyone who's supported us in the last 10 years. And to show our appreciation, we're going to have 10% off of everything. We're going to have a photo booth. We're going to have a dog costume contest. If you have a dog that you would like to enter into this contest, you can win prizes, including Green Apple gift cards and merch and whatnot. Free beer from Fort Point, and some live music. So if you have any questions about that, I'll gladly tell you every single detail about it. We would love to have you here. We have copies of books by both of our authors at the front register. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the authors who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you're able, we always appreciate it. And I'll make a special pitch that I think these two books together are like a really dynamic pair, just like our two authors in conversation. I think they complement one another. So get the gift pack tonight while they're both here. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us. First, Bay Area native Elizabeth Stix writes and edits in Northern California. Her stories have appeared in McSweeney's, Tin House, Los Angeles Times Sunday Magazine, and many other places. Her debut story collection, Things I Want Back From You, is out now. Let's give one more hand for Elizabeth Stix. And last but most certainly not least, Spencer Fleury is the author of How I'm Spending My Afterlife from Woodhull Press. He lives in San Francisco, and his book, I Blame Myself, but Also You, and Other Stories, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Spencer Fleury.
Thank you.
Hi.
Someone's got to start.
Someone's going to start. And it's all, the mic's good and I'm in the right place. Thanks everybody for coming. It's wonderful to be here, and I can't wait to talk about your book, which I loved and have just finished reading for the second time, and I could read it again right now. I thought maybe we could start with you hearing some of the stories in your words. Do you want to start by reading something for us tonight, and then we can go into conversation about it?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Before I do that, I just wanted to thank you for joining me here tonight. It's very gracious of you, and I really appreciate your presence. And I wanted to thank Carr for everything that they've done to put this together and enable this wonderful event. So thank you both very much. So I will be reading some, not all, but some of a story from this book called Tube Man. I was told once upon a time that this story is actually about me and my ex-wife. So who knows? The epiphany that enabled Carl to finally tube-size his life came, as those things often do, one Wednesday night over a plate of mushroom and bacon risotto. It was so powerful that it compelled him to slam down his fork and shove himself away from the heavy teak dining table without realizing he was doing it. "Are you okay?" Sarah said. "You've been acting weird." "Of course," he thought. Of course. "I'm fine," he rasped. "Never better." And it was true, though it was also true that he had been acting strangely in recent weeks, or at least differently. Sarah set her wine glass down, folded her arms, and appraised him. "I don't believe you," she said, drumming her French tips on her bicep. "You definitely don't sound okay." "It's nothing," he said. "The wine went down the wrong pipe is all." He dug his phone out of his pocket and began poking at the display. "Hey, you know the rules," Sarah said. "No phones at the table." "I have to look something up real quick." Normally, Carl was the stickler for enforcing the no phones rule. It was one of his methods of shoring up the ever-sagging barrier between his working hours and his personal time. The last thing he wanted to do over dinner was respond to code reviews or pull requests or inane questions from QA or the product team or, God forbid, marketing about the new build or issues with the upcoming deploy, and he knew that if he didn't go to extreme lengths to make himself inaccessible, he'd never get even a moment's peace. Such were the travails of being the best coder at the company. "I don't care what you're doing, the rule is the rule," she said. "It was your idea anyway." "Fine," Carl said, and he stood up and strode into the living room. By the time he got there, he had his answer, but it would have to wait until morning. "The biggest we got is the 55-gallon model," the man told him over the phone the next day. "What were you looking to use it for?" "How wide is the opening?" Carl asked. "Let me see here. It says 23 3/8. And they're what, 3 feet tall or so?" "Not quite. More like 34.5 inches, so almost." That would be a tight fit even for Carl. Still, he was pretty sure it could be done. He had seen people putting dead bodies in large plastic drums in movies and on TV. Some of those bodies had been a lot fatter than he was. "I think I'd better get 3, he said. "Can I pick them up tomorrow?" Carl had been thinking about tubes for months, ever since he read an article in the Sunday Travel section about how men in Tokyo live in them. Just long enough to lie down in, the tubes form a honeycomb, stacked 3 high, each with a built-in TV screen the size of a cereal box and a flimsy privacy curtain strung across the opening. There are entire hotels of these ultra-Spartan accommodations, each floor stuffed with pods upon pods of anonymous salarymen, no room for much of anything beyond the occupant and his thoughts. He was impressed with that kind of asceticism, that willingness to live without, in a city where there was just so much of everything. People, food, bacteria, stimuli, perversion. No, more than just impressed, fixated was more like it. Lately, he could think of little else. "It's not because they don't want any more space," Sarah pointed out one night over a glass of Viognier on the back patio. "They're stockbrokers or whatever, not monks. They want space, believe me. They just can't afford it. Everyone knows Tokyo is crazy expensive. It's the most expensive city in the world." "Not this year," Carl said. He tried to tune out the frantic buzzing of the cicadas, that indigenous dinner music of summertime, but could not. He scowled. The very sound of it made him sweat. "Forbes says it's Hong Kong." Same difference. Anyway, the point is, if they could get a decent 2-bedroom in a rent-controlled building, they'd be all over it, especially if there's a washer-dryer hookup. Which is exactly what the article had said, but for Carl that was beside the point. His whole life he had carried around a mental inventory of appliances and gadgets that, taken together, set out the implicit baseline requirements of civilized life. A car, an iPod, or before that a Walkman, cable TV with 300 high-definition premium channels, a microwave oven, a tablet. But the tube men, they needed none of these things. They needed nothing, and because of that, they had everything. Carl had plenty of things, more things than he could count. He was drowning in things, and for what? Did they make him any smarter or more virile or even happier? For the most part, no. He was tired of needing them, and he had been for a long time. He just hadn't known it until he read that article. Sarah, on the other hand, liked things just fine. "I think the microwave is broken," she told him the next afternoon. She fiddled with the power cord and poked at the front panel's inert buttons. No happy little electronic chirps came in response this time, as they always had before. Her fingertips tapped out an impatient staccato pattern against the granite countertop. Perfect, Carl said. Let's not get a new one. Don't be ridiculous, she said, squinting at him. They're like $80 at Best Buy. Oh, I'm perfectly serious, he said. Whatever. She let the cord drop onto the counter. I have to water the plants. Carl didn't move from his chair, didn't shift his gaze from his laptop as she left. He had no intention of going to Best Buy that day, or the next, or the next. Instead, he started cooking slow dinners over the gas flame of the stovetop or grilling meats in his oversized ceramic barbecue cooker on the patio. He reheated leftovers the same way. He made popcorn in a cavernous heavy pot with some canola oil, and he knew that soon he would discover that he had no real need for a microwave. He never did, really, and probably never would again. You see, he said to her one day weeks later as he warmed up some leftover barbecue chicken thighs on the stove, no cold spots in the center. Who needs a microwave? It takes so long, though, she said, and everything always comes out burnt. It's just a matter of adjusting. You'll get the hang of it. I don't want to get the hang of it. What I want is a microwave. I haven't lived without a microwave since I was a teenager. I'm civilized now, and I need to stay that way. Oh, just relax, he said. We're still alive, still civilized. The only difference is we can't melt a brick of frozen lasagna in the time it takes to walk out to the mailbox and back. He smiled as he said this. He did not consider it to be any sort of deprivation. Maybe that's how it starts, he thought. Maybe it's a matter of shedding the easy stuff first, leaving the low-hanging fruit on the branches. Just start passively and work up to discarding the perfectly good yet still non-essential. Once you realize how unnecessary a thing really is, not having it is no longer a sacrifice. Maybe that's how the Tube Men did it. I'll stop there. Thanks.
So that's it. Is this okay? Like your narrator, I'm not so in love with technology. So I'm glad you started with that one, because that is a good segue into some of my first questions.
All right.
One of my favorite lines you actually read, and you didn't, it's not exactly this, but it's something about he's seeking the peace of being inaccessible to others.
Oh, right, yeah.
Less and less and less and less, and as the story goes on, and this as the story goes on, he sheds more and more relationships, objects, and extreme minimalism is the same as peace, and that recurs in your book. You have people who are living off the grid. You have people who are within their own family units, very isolated, and like loneliness when they're not alone. And sometimes they seek it out, and sometimes they just experience it. There's one guy, and I think it's when the drought is over, he says, or when the drought ends, I think, he says, you don't understand, I'm not where my my driver's license says I'm from. That's just the last place I lived. Is that? Oh, that's in the That's in
I
the
think that might be in the pyramid story. Yeah.
These people who migrate, these nomads. Yeah. So I just wanted to talk to you about isolation, because it's funny, because Carr said that our books are kind of companions, and my book, I would say, is about this hunger for connection with people, and your book is not. It's more like about people who are looking inward and just really trying to understand themselves, and sometimes other people need to be let go in order to find that. So talk to me about loneliness and isolation in your book.
No, it's a very interesting interpretation, because I had always interpreted it the opposite, but I can see exactly where you're coming from now. yeah, it's I mean, it's a big question that you asked, so I'm going to try to formulate some responses here. But yeah, the idea that like the idea that these people are trying, or they're shedding things, they're like moving towards a more simplified life, or trying to move towards that. I don't know. I think that is a reflection of certainly where I was when I was writing a lot of these stories. There was a time, 15 years ago, when I was very captivated by the idea of a tiny house. I always kind of knew it would never work for me, but it didn't mean that I didn't find it extremely appealing. Just to pare down, to essentials, but you see the pictures of these tiny houses, and they're all very, very twee and very luxurious in their own little way. So you're almost not really giving up all that much. So I think that kind of vibe that I just was carrying in my life at that time sort of informs the searching that these people are doing. And well, I would argue that they are looking for connection, but they've grown disenchanted about that process, or they've been looking and they've been failing at finding what they're looking for, and as a result, they're turning away from that. Maybe that seems like something that would fit for where I was when I was writing this book.
In the book, the characters try to connect, you're saying, but why do you think they keep failing?
I think that a lot of life is failure. I mean, I think that, and that has always been, that's just been my experience, the way that I have kind of interpreted the events of my own life. There have been successes. But yeah, there's a lot of failure leading up to that, and certainly, I'm the kind of person who has a small number of good friends, and that's not for lack of trying necessarily. It's just sometimes there's just that difficulty really managing to make that connection that you want to make, and I think that for a lot of these characters, they're in that same boat.
Interesting. I was going to ask another question, but I think I want something. I'm going to go out of order. Well, sometimes a lot of the characters, they have like a totem or an object that they hold that they think is going to fix it all, that will answer these questions. I feel like sometimes the characters don't know what question they are asking, which is all the more frustrating for them because they're desperate in their asking, but they can't like decode what it is they want to decode. And they have an object like the note in the title story that says, "I blame myself and also you." She's like, "Me? Is it me? Is it even for me? And what does it mean? And what did I do?" And then in Fantastic Atlas, she's got all those maps that are her guide, but she isn't sure how to read them or what places they represent. So I wanted to ask you about the idea of totems and objects, and how they play a function in the book.
Well, I think for a lot of people can make those same attachments to things, but I don't really think that we ever really find the answers that we're looking for. And this may tie back to the earlier question about shedding things and simplifying. On the other hand, you have
It's funny, because they're letting go of things and also clutching them really tight.
Clutching them at the same time. And the things that they are clutching, they value for whatever reason, but it never really does help, does it? I mean, that note, she never really finds out what that note means. And, we know what happens with the maps. Well, you and I know, not everybody else in the room does. And there are a couple other examples in there as well where there's a thing that they're fixated on, and it doesn't mean what they think it means. And I find that's my experience in life as well. I mean, I guess I wrote a lot of this book about what's going on in my own subconscious, which I guess is not really that unusual.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I also wanted to ask you about the tension in your stories. So your stories don't have tidy endings.
No.
Right? They have this tension and this quest and this hunt, and usually the resolution doesn't happen on the page. You often end like right before it happens, or even a little bit before that. And so the reader has to decide if they think it has a happy ending or not.
Right.
So tell me about that decision. Tell me why you decided to sustain the tension until the end and not give the reader like this bow of a resolution.
That has never been my style, and I know there's one person in this room, Ken, who hates that. But that's never been my style. I've always preferred stories that leave at least a little ambiguity at the ending. I like to have to work for it to figure out what the story is saying, and it's also, in a way, it's like a choose your own adventure, but you kind of get to decide what the ending was.
Yeah, I like that too. And that's kind of why I was not kidding when I could say I could read it again. Because there's a lot of access points for the reader, because you do get to, read it and you think that it's a hopeful story or it's a depressing story, like the story where, I don't want to give too much away, but let's say hypothetically there's a plane crash. The first time I read it, I thought that was a devastating end. But then I realized at the end that the woman's imagining a reunion with her deceased husband, and I thought, oh, so that's a happy ending. So you can really sort of access it the way it speaks to you. So I like that. Sorry.
I'm glad to hear it.
Well, tell me generally a little bit about your process for creating this book, because I know your last book was a novel.
Right.
And this book is a short story collection. And I know a lot of people, me, I wrote a linked story collection. There's kind of a lot of pressure to write a linked story collection.
Yeah, these days there is.
And it's less, it's harder to publish a story collection that is not linked. However, I would say that your story is almost a linked collection because there's such a dominant, it's very thematically linked. I feel like the stories are of a piece. So what made you want to tell this story in this way?
Well, the way this book came about is when I first started to write fiction seriously, because I always wanted to do it, and like a lot of people, I would sit down or I would try to write something. Oh, this is terrible. I guess I can't write fiction, and then I would just go do something else. So I've been a writer of some sort for most of my life, but just fiction was always the thing that eluded me until about 2014. I figured, we're going to make this happen. I started writing flash fiction because I figured that was an easy entry point in terms of managing my attention span, because that was always an issue. And also, as I found out as I started doing it, it enabled me to really work that muscle where I would just write a story that's kind of ambiguous and people are going to have to think about it, because there's only 500 words or so,
right.
So you can't really tell the whole thing. At that same time, I'd started writing the novel, and that was really almost an experiment at first, just to see if I could do it, because I had no confidence that I would be able to write a coherent fictional story that went on for the length of a book that would be any good, worth reading, any of that stuff. I think that I eventually did okay with it. But at the same time, I was writing more and more short stories, because that's always been my preferred form. Most of the ones in this book were published before, in various places, and I've written a lot that I just never did anything with. These are always the ones that I felt spoke to me the most, that really reflected whatever my amorphous, undefined artistic goals were, because I never really sat down and wrote a list of artistic goals for myself, but I just had a kind of an idea of what I was trying to put out into the world. And after I got to a certain point, a certain number of pages, I thought that I think that this could adhere. This could kind of adhere together and be a cohesive piece of fiction. I worked with an editor to help me whip all that into shape. And to speak to the point you made earlier about the difficulty of selling an unlinked story collection, this manuscript got 116 rejections from agents and editors alike. And I kept a spreadsheet because I didn't want to send it to the same place twice. That would just be gauche. So, but I still did that once or twice accidentally because, as you can imagine, it's a big spreadsheet, 116. So I found Malarkey Books online, and they were open to submissions. And I didn't really know them because they were fairly new at the time. They'd only published two books at that point. And I said, okay, this is the last one. And
did you really say that before you sent it? You said, this is my last shot?
This is the last one. If it doesn't go here, then we'll try it again in a few years. Who knows? And it took a few years actually to get from sending it to this, just because Malarkey Books is a one-man show. So he's reading all the submissions. He's doing all the stuff. So it probably took almost 2.5 years from when I sent it to him to when we got it out.
And those 116, over the course of those 116, what my writing partner and I call responses, rejections, we just call them responses. Did you change it?
I changed the order. But that was towards the end. But no, I didn't really change it because I didn't really know why it wasn't getting any interest. There were a couple of times where some of the smaller presses, they will do sort of a contest for what this is what we're going to publish. We're going to publish the winner of this contest. That's going to be our fiction for this year. And there were a couple of times that I got honorable mention in that. And so that was enough to kind of convince me that, okay, it's probably, it's probably on the right track. But when you get when editors pass, they don't tell you why. Right. They don't tell you what's wrong with it. So my fear is always, am I going to be fixing something that isn't broken and just making this worse? Right.
I think one of the things is that a lot of people go to MFA programs.
Yeah.
And they leave with MFA programs with essentially a short story collection. Even if they want to be novelists, even if they don't want to be short story writers, they have this body of work. And so there's a lot of submissions. There's a lot of competitions, even though you think, oh, these little indies should be easier than the big houses, but they get just swamped with collections.
Yeah, they're easier to send a manuscript to than the big houses, because with the big house you need to get an agent first. But your odds are probably statistically lower with any given indie press than if you have an agent getting into a bigger house.
Plus, I'm showing my age here, but now that you can submit electronically, it's so easy.
Yeah,
so easy.
For sure.
Interesting. Well, tell me, I'm interested in setting. And by setting, I also means placing it in time, because it seems, and this might just be an effect of the time in which the stories were written, but they're not really written in the present. Right. They're written in a past that I felt was like maybe 1997 to 2005 or something, because people had flip phones. People had cell phones, but they were flip phones. And they were working in record stores. And, but they were texting. I don't know if they're going like A3, whatever.
I remember those days.
But it's also a lot of the stories are set in San Francisco. And I've been here. It just reminded me of a San Francisco of a time that is not the time anymore.
Oh, right, for sure.
And so I just wondered, I wondered if this story collection could take place in San Francisco today, or if there was something about the time and the era that spoke to you for these stories.
Yeah, that's a good question. Two of the two big stories that take place here in the collection, When the Drought Finally Ends and Fantastic Atlas. Those don't. I didn't have a particular time in mind for when those were supposed to take place. Whereas, Headbangers Ball, that's in the late 80s, the Singapore Song about the same time. So, and then the one I just read from, I wrote that in 2014, as you could tell, because it mentioned a tablet. It mentions these things that are not really part of contemporary life as much as they used to be. But yeah, that's when I was writing it. That's where my mind, obviously with the stuff from even further back, set further back. That's drawn from places and times that spoke to me as a younger person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and both of those stories that I mentioned that take place in the 80s are both set in Florida, which is of course where I was in the 80s. So it's obviously there is a lot of me in this book, but they're not set in the present time. I think I doubt that anything that I'm really going to write for as long as I continue to do this sort of thing is going to be set necessarily in the immediate moment or the immediate past from when someone is reading it. And that's for a couple of reasons. I mean, the first reason is that I just write slow. And, I can't try to jump on a zeitgeist because it's going to be long gone before I get out of my chair. And the other reason is I've never really thought that it's necessary to set fiction in the contemporary era in order to say something about the contemporary era. It can take place whenever and still have something to say about the human experience at almost any time if you do it right and if you hit that universality that you're shooting for, which is what I was shooting for. Hopefully I'll let all of you decide if I hit that or not.
Do you think that the particular kind of loneliness that they feel is unique to that time period?
I don't think so. I think it looks different. I think technology helps us convince ourselves that it's different. You remember that the internet and social media were supposed to make us all feel so much more connected. Right. How many times do we hear Mark Zuckerberg say that shit? But it's, it has the exact opposite effect a lot of times. It pushes us apart. It makes us feel lonelier in our spaces because, often we forget how to connect in the real world with people because everything has moved in that other direction.
Right. One of the things that comes up in different stories in different ways is the idea of masks.
Yeah.
Literal masks and figurative masks and the freaks behind the mask and how there is a kind of a freak, the devil in the record store who in fact isn't wearing a mask. What you see is what you get with that guy. But other people are wearing masks, and there's this last line, not the last line, but like close to the last line in the last Fight or Flight, the last story. I'm just going to read a couple sentences. This husband and wife, they're not connecting. Right, and at the very end, this is the last page of the book. Janine looked at him for a long time. She wanted to peer all the way to his soul and then beyond even that, down to the unknowable germ at the core of his personhood, so that she could finally catch a glimpse, even for a fraction of a second, of who the man she married really was, of what the hell he really wanted. But it was no good. His eyes were completely impenetrable. All she could see in them was herself. Talk to me a little bit about masks in this book.
Okay, yeah. It actually wasn't a theme that I had necessarily thought of until you brought it up. But you're right. It is something that I go back to in the title story, the first story. Lindsay is trying on these masks of who she is, who she's pretending to be in a given moment, and she does that a couple of different times without really knowing why. In the story set in the record store, you've got the guy behind the counter that the kids think is the devil, and his prized possession is that that poster, that Kiss poster from the album, where they're taking off these masks, these there's a phrase for it that I can't quite remember, but they're taking off these masks to reveal that their faces beneath the masks are exactly the same as so yeah, it's interesting that you point this out now, that the guy behind the counter, same thing. The mask that the kids think that they see, it reveals nothing different. Just a guy. Yeah, he is who he is. Whereas in the first story, Lindsay is not. She's not the person that she keeps pretending to be to get whatever it is she thinks she wants in that moment. Because I don't even think she really knows. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's in there. This is one of the things I really like about talking about my work with people, is that it shows, it's a great way for me to find out just what I've written about.
Yeah, well, it's all your self-conscious, and it keeps expressing itself in different ways.
This is better than therapy.
That's true. Writing is. Tell me about that. Talking about that first story, I blame myself, but also you, which is such a fantastic title. How do you think that applies to why did you choose that for the book? How does it apply as an idea across stories?
Well, I think the first and most practical reason that I chose that is because I think it's the best story in the book. That's the one that that's the one that I like the best. And it's been really interesting having people tell me which stories are their favorites, because nobody else has said that one yet. So that's but yeah, I feel like that title, because I had thought about this before, and I feel like using that for the title does kind of express that ambivalence and that sort of confused attempt to not necessarily lay blame, but just kind of figure out what in the hell is going on here. Who am I? Who are you? And all of these characters are going through something like that. They're all trying to figure out, certainly about themselves, and often about the other people in their lives. And so, yeah, I felt like that kind of was a good way to tie all that together and just sort of not necessarily link them literally, but as you said before, at least thematically.
Yeah, there's a line that you're just reminding me of, and I can't. Singapore Song? There's a line in Singapore Song about maybe I underlined it. Here, I found it.
Hooray!
Yay! Well, what you just said about, I blame myself, but just the idea about blame.
Mm-hmm.
The idea about blame. It's so interesting to me when you're trying to make this book about people trying to connect, and there's also about blaming others for your pain and everything. There's this line about that kid talking about his father. His father's building a boat, and he says they're all gonna sail to Chile. Mm-hmm. I don't get the sense he's asked any of them if they want to go to Chile, but he's building a boat, and one of the problems with the boat is that it's big enough to hold the whole family, and he might have bit off more than he could chew by making such a big boat. And there's this line. Maybe if he started smaller, he could have built something seaworthy, but he needed something big enough for all four of us. Something that could carry us all far from his disappointment and frustration, even though we are at least partly the cause of it. I felt that in the first story too, where he's got this nice wife, and we get a little backstory on their marriage, but at the same time, they are blaming each other for their mutual unhappiness.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the people closest to you, it seems. I've experienced that. I bet a lot of people have experienced that. That even if it's not really their fault, that's who's there. They've got to have something to do with it. And even if you don't necessarily intentionally mean to, or even if you don't consciously feel that way, that kind of feeling can very easily well up. And I think we've all seen that.
Yeah. I find it so interesting. I find it really interesting when you write about imperfect, broken, flawed people trying to connect with other broken, flawed people, and it's like right there, but they can't do it.
Yeah.
They can't do it for all these reasons, and they can't understand. And there's in a lot of your characters, they're so frustrated and confused because they can't understand what's in their way, and they can't understand even exactly what they want. There's this forward motion, this like drive to keep moving forward, sometimes even like literally moving from town to town to town to keep trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I'm these are the kinds of people that I'm always sympathetic to.
Right.
Yeah, they're broken, they are flawed, as you've been, and we all know broken and flawed people, and some of them are really horrible to have in your life, but for others, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of us are like that,
Right.
and so yeah, that's. So I hope I've portrayed these characters with that amount of humanity and that amount of sympathy that I'm trying to do. But yeah, it's some people give up, and those people don't really make for good fiction.
Right. Well, I think everybody is broken and flawed. I think that's like the human condition. I think that's the nature of being human. So I think you have a lot of compassion for your characters, and for as a reader, I find them very real and I have a lot of compassion for them.
Glad to hear that.
Should we open it up for questions? Do people want to join the conversation and talk about the book and ask questions? Who wants to ask?
I'll break the ice.
Sure.
So you talked about a lot of real world, or a lot of yourself is in this book.
Yeah.
How long did you live without a microwave? And a two-parter. Did your ex ever replace it after you left?
I'm just going to repeat the question because they asked us to repeat the question because of the live stream. How long in your real life did you live without a microwave, and did your ex replace it?
I believe there is a microwave in that house now, although when I was just back to Florida this past week, I did not go in the house, so I don't know for sure. But yeah, it was probably a good 2 or 3 years. And yeah, it worked just fine.
Yeah, I didn't. It's funny that you say that because I had a microwave and it broke, and I didn't replace it, and I loved not having one. It was fantastic.
I barely use the one we have now.
Yeah, now I have one and I use it all the time. But the time that I was able to let it go, it was awesome.
Yeah, so the microwave was an easy subject for that one, just because I felt like I was on very solid ground.
Do you own any tubes currently?
Do you own any tubes currently?
None that are human-sized.
Anybody else? Surely.
I've got one.
Oh,
I'm curious about. What was you talked about how you've written all of these stories over a fairly long period of time in your life. What was the first story in this collection that you finished, and about when did you finish it? And what's the most recent story in this collection that you wrote?
Okay.
What was the first story that you wrote in the collection? I actually thought of another question after. What was the first what was the first story that you wrote, and what was the most recent story?
Okay, the first one in this collection that I wrote was Fancy Gap, which is the only flash fiction piece in the whole thing. So it's only like 2 pages. That was a very last-minute addition to the manuscript. The most recent one, I believe, was Fight or Flight, which is the one immediately after that. That closes out the book. Yeah, and it's you say a long period of time, and I probably wrote these over the course of about 4.5, 5 years. So the fact that the fact that I started these in like 2014 and now it's 2024. It's, I've just been trying to get them out there, get this book out there for that long. So yeah.
I thought of one more question.
Go for it.
You said, I blame myself, but also you is your favorite story in the book?
Yes.
How come?
I don't know. I honestly don't know why it is. I feel like it's got more to do with the experience of writing it when I was doing it. It really felt, I don't know if organic is really a good way to describe it, but it came very naturally. I felt like I was in control of that process more than I often am when writing. I'm never fully in control, of course, but I felt like I was more. That I had that I ended up very close to the place that I had envisioned, and I was very happy with that result. You know, a lot of these other stories, I ended up very far away from where I had first envisioned. And, you know, it's a good thing, too, because I think they're better stories for that. But that one, it just really seemed like this would be the ideal experience, the ideal short story creation experience was what I did for that one.
Anybody in the back?
So how do you reach like a stopping point for revising and updating and rethinking, and especially after something goes to print, maybe if you read it, you know, months or years later, you realize, oh, I didn't like that, or you know, at that point it's sort of too late. Like, how do you deal with that?
I think I can repeat it. Like, how do you know when you're done, and what's your revision process like, and how do you know when to stop, and how do you feel like about a story once it's done?
Well, yeah. When I guess I know that I'm done when I keep making the same change and undoing that same change. I just keep doing that. That's okay. This is complete. But you said something else about reading a story after it's been published, much further down the line, and how do I deal with that? Well, I deal with it the way that I dealt with it while I was reading the story to you, which is I skip the words that I wish I hadn't put in there. So,
are there any stories that you left out of this collection that you wanted to put in? Like, how did you cull the number down, and do you have a little collection of stories that you either wish you could put in or want to add to a new book or a new collection?
I say, just how did you choose the stories that you included, and what other stories might you still have?
Yeah, there were a couple that I had thought about putting in here. One of them was a little too close to one of the other stories in terms of setting and theme. I mean, they're all tied together thematically to an extent, but there was one that it was almost like I was just writing a different version of the same story, so that one didn't make it in. And then another one, I just didn't really feel like I had it right. So I really wanted to include. I still don't think I have it right. So it's been on the hard drive for a while.
I think we have time for one more question. Anybody has one more question? I think I see a hand in the back.
My question is like, was that on purpose? So the thing I noticed in the stories is that it felt to me like the characters ended more alone than they were at the beginning, and sometimes it felt like other characters, I could like see why they were being punished. Like in Two Man, it's like, this is too much, I'm leaving. And I was like, I follow you. And in Two Go, he gets left alone like for being great, it felt like. And so it felt like maybe everybody's too broad of a brush, but it felt like generally the characters are ending up more alone than they were in the beginning, no matter how valiant or difficult they were being. And I'm wondering, like, was that on purpose? Was there anything behind that?
So I'll just repeat that. Oh, so if I had the microphone here the whole time, maybe it would have sounded better. So a lot of the characters seem like they end up worse off and more alone at the end than they did in the beginning. It's like a bad to worse arc. Was that on purpose, and what were you thinking about?
I don't know if it was actually on purpose. I think it kind of goes to what you were talking about earlier with the more ambiguous, unresolved endings. Maybe these aren't actually, maybe there's never really an ending. This is just, almost a stopping point that wraps up nicely into a fictional, a story-sized object. But no, it wasn't intentional. I think it is just probably the product of my basic mentality.
So Spencer's going to sign books. If you want to go buy them in the front first, and then come back and you can sign books. And
yeah.
Thank you to Carr and to Green Apple and to Spencer and to everybody for
And to
coming.
all of you for coming. Thank you so much.
We give one more hand for Spencer Fleury.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and letting us celebrate with you. And Elizabeth, thank you for reading twice, I hear, and for asking such good questions. And all of you, too, for being so attentive and reading or about to read this book. I'll be brief. I'm just here to let you know what Elizabeth said. Books are available at the front register. You can find them there. And Spencer, I'm going to have you just at the back desk right next to this refreshment table to sign books.
Sounds good.
Great. If you have any other questions, if you want to sign your dog up for a costume contest, let me know. And if not, please take a look around, make yourselves comfortable, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.